Welcome you all. My name is Cecilia Alemani. I am the curator of Põder, Space for My Body, which is the very first large-scale retrospective of Põder's work outside of Estonia, hosted here in this amazing space of the Museum Sush. We're here in the first room of the exhibition Põder, Space for My Body, and what you see behind me is a large platform that features many of Anu's works from the 1980s. You will see that they are mostly busts and dolls and figures. These are, in fact, the main characters of her production. And what is very characteristic of this time is that the figure, which is often the female figure, is never portrayed in its entirety, but bodies are fragmented, amputated, or distorted. They hover between being very sensual and almost erotic to being violent. In fact, Anu's oeuvre often features incisions and cuts and limbs that are broken. So there is this very interesting tensions between these two poles in her practice. One of the most distinctive aspects of Anu's practice is the use of unconventional material. In the platform behind me, you see many works from the 1980s in which she adopted a very special material, which is this pink plastic that you see used in many works, including the work just standing next to me. It's a plastic that she received from her brother, who was a doctor in a hospital, and it was a plastic that was used originally for medical purposes, or to make corsets or things to hold your body straight. She would get this large plastic sheet, warm them up in her bathtub, and then cast them and mold them in different shapes and sizes, very often reminiscent of the female body, like you can see in this work here. One of the most important artworks of this period is the sculpture Before Performance, which you see just behind me. It's a work that Anu made in 1981, and it's a standing figure. It's about the size of the artist. It's about 160 centimeters tall. Anu, before being trained as an artist, was actually trained as a ballet dancer. She wanted to be a dancer, but because of the minute size of her body, she was told many times that she could not pursue that career. And so Before Performance, this artwork is likely also a hint to that missing career that she never had. And you will see in the rest of the exhibition, there are several works that refer to that sphere of dance and performance. In this room, we are featuring two of the oldest works of Põder. They are both from 1978. She made works before this date, but these are the two surviving works that are the oldest ones. First of all, this bas-relief, which is titled Red, Blue, Blue, Red. It's an artwork that is composed of these two mannequins installed in profile, back to back, and painted with these very vivid colors, blue and red. Many people and many critics have pointed to this piece as a clear indication that Põder was knowledgeable and influenced by the pop art movement, but in the same sense, it is a possible indication also of a larger discourse. If you think of red and blue as also the colors of the Soviet flag on one side and the Estonian flag on the other side, it clearly shows a reflection on the split identity of Estonian people in the 1970s. And on this side, we have also another artwork from 1978. It's an exquisite plaster titled Traveler. It depicts a woman sitting on a sort of invisible chair, a large suitcase on her laps. And it shows how Põder was clearly trained in classical sculpture, but also shows, in a way similar to Red, Blue, and Blue, Red, a sort of ironic take on Estonian society, especially in the 70s. If you think of a woman sitting and waiting for a journey that is never going to happen because it was impossible to travel in those years, it is a sort of ironic reflection of the impossibility of traveling. In this room, you will see a variety of sculptures starting from the 70s all the way to the early 1990s. The first artwork, or the oldest artwork, is this self-portrait made of plaster that you see here. It was made in the same year of the artworks that we saw downstairs, Traveler and Red Blue and Blue Red. It is the only self-portrait that we know Anu Põder made, and it was made as a dead mask, which is a tradition that, of course, is very common for saints and other religious figures, but also political leaders like Lenin. In this case, though, Anu Põder portrayed herself with her hands kind of choking around the neck, almost in an act of suffocation. Starting in the 1990s, after Estonian independence of 1991, Anu Põder started using fabric much more than in the 1980s, where her work was very much dictated by this very rigid plastic that she used and you saw downstairs. Rolled up figure is one of the first examples of using textile and fabric in her work. At first, this sculpture looks like an abstract sculpture, but if you look at it carefully, you can recognize anatomical forms. This is a back that is covered with orange stitches that remind you almost as geographical coordinates of a map. And then this rolled up part hint to body parts like legs and arms, almost like a woman crouches, and in here you can see the profile of a breast. So the reflection on the human figure and the female body is still very present in Anu's work, but she's changing completely the materiality of her objects. In this room, you see a work from 1994 titled Long Bag. It is one of Anu's most important works from this period. She continues using fabric as her main material and textile, and the sculpture itself is composed of two elements, a vertical one in which you can see the silhouette of a standing figure, and this long, elongated black drape. It is one of the darkest pieces, in my opinion, that Anu made. It shows again her attention and passion for the human figure, but in this case the human figure is completely enveloped and contained in a thick layer of felt. It's almost hard to distinguish her shape. There is also an interesting fact about this sculpture. She recycled her own sculptures. So what you see contained inside is an early sculpture that she made in the 1980s that she decided to actually envelop and recycle for this sculpture. In this room, we are showing two artworks from the mid-1990s. Anu continues using textile and fabric in creating these soft and gentle figures. Anu was trained as an artist, but before being trained as an artist, she really wanted to pursue a career as a dancer, as a ballet dancer, which eventually she couldn't because of her minute and petite size. So many of these artworks that are made of soft materials actually hint to that career. So here we have two figures, one taking a step forward and one likely taking a bow, almost like they were entering the stage of performance. In this room, we're bringing together a number of artworks from the mid-1990s. They're titled Pattern a Sign, and they are basically winter coats that she either found or that belonged to her family and were passed on generation to generation. And she takes these ready-made coats and slice them open. She removes parts of them, she cuts them, and she exhibits what's inside these coats. So the lining, the fur, all the seams, and sewing pattern inside. So she uses the same strategies and methodologies that we've seen on the ground floor in the display of dolls and mannequins, but this time using ready-made objects like coats and jackets, really thinking about almost a forensic cut to show the guts of these coats. You don't see anymore the representation of the women's body or men's body, but Anu uses these coats as a stand-in for the figure. This is one of Anu Põder's most iconic artworks. It is titled Space for My Body, which is also the title of the exhibition. It was realized in 1995, and it follows the same procedures and techniques that she used in the coats and jackets that you see in the same room. In this case, though, the body is deconstructed by cutting open different layers of female garments, including a bra, a tank top, a t-shirt, and then a shirt. The only things that are left are the seams and the buttons of this skeletal sculpture, and you can still notice the little brand tags of the garments, which are rigorously Western. To me, is one of the most beautiful artworks here in the exhibition, and it's very iconic, especially thinking about the methodologies and strategies that Põder used, especially when it came to the female body. In this room, you see a display of works from the mid-1990s, in particular, a number of bags that Anu Põder slashed open, revealing almost the inner guts of this very mundane object. These are bags that she either had at home or found. They're all made of faux leather. And in a way, she continues using the same methods that we've seen in her approach to other garments and clothes. So slashing and cutting, almost like a surgical operation. But in this case, it's interesting to think about this sort of female object also as an indicator of female subjectivity. In addition to the bags that have been slashed open, I want to point out in particular to this bag, which is actually filled with soap. So soap is actually a material that Põder starts using in the 1990s and has references to her rural upbringing. She was born in the south of Estonia in a village called Kanepi, and she remembers her mother and her grandmother making soap by boiling this viscous substance for hours and hours. So soap is something that she has been using and experimenting with for many years, but also is an indicator or like a reference to her life and rural upbringing in the south of Estonia. This is an artwork titled Lectern from 2007. And I think it's one of the most original works of Põder. Põder is an artist that is not necessarily known for political artworks. Her work has been very much an investigation of female subjectivity, and this is in a way a fairly new piece in her vocabulary. It consists of a ready-made podium that she appropriated, and I think what it might be about is a commentary on the many political speeches that she must have witnessed in those years of the reformation of the Estonian country. And while the front of the piece looks like a generic plinth or podium, as you walk on the back, you discover the artist's gesture. And what she did, likely with a torch, she burned the surface of this lectern, or maybe she burned the person that was sitting right there. It's unclear, but this is also an artistic gesture that we've seen in other pieces, like the worn ornament, the necklace upstairs. This is a work titled Import and Export Bags from 2001, and it consists of 7 elements that are made of recycled bags that Anu Põder likely found in her farm in the south of Estonia. They were used for fertilizer, and you can still see on the surface of the bag texts and writings that is written both in Russian and in English that says import and export. But what she did, she drew a silhouette of a person and then manipulated this silhouette in very different ways by slicing it horizontally, by piercing with a needle, or by inserting things like sand or pebbles. So bringing the human side into these bags. And bags, as we've seen, are one of Põder's favorite materials. She's used them before in the piece called Long Bag or Tested Profit. And this is a very beautiful, quite ethereal piece also. I'm standing in front of an artwork from 1999 called Tested Profit Rubber Bags. These are 4 linoleum silhouettes that she realized in the late 1990s. And she basically appropriated sheets of linoleum, which was a cheap material that was very common, perhaps from a house renovation, and incised them with these slashes and pierced to create a silhouette of a female figure. These are very evocative works in which, again, the figure is almost evanescent. It's almost immaterial, and yet it's extremely aggressive and violent due to this gesture of piercing and slashing this cheap material. The work that I'm standing in front of is titled Knotholes, and it's from the early 2000s, and it's composed of 2 wooden benches that she likely found around her house in the south of Estonia. Upon a closer inspection, you can notice there are certain details that are embedded in the surface of the bench. And what they are kind of little sculptures made of papier-mâché that are representing the last vertebra of a human back, almost as depicting ghostly presence of people that once sat on this bench and have now left. This is Anu Põder's last work, realized in 2011, just the year before she passed away. It is titled Metal Lining, and it's composed of a male jacket and a pair of male shoes. This time, the act of slashing and dissecting garments has been replaced by perhaps a more peaceful act. In fact, the jacket is completely lined inside by a metal armature, almost to evoke a sort of ghostly memory or a presence that is not there, which is also highlighted by the fact that the jacket is almost levitating. And this is also a quite unique artwork. It's called Worn Ornament, and it was made in 2008. And it consists of a woman's necklace. You can see some of the original beads that are likely belonging to a cheap kind of Soviet-era necklace, female necklace made of plastic beads. Then the beads are intertwined with these large pieces of wood that has been charred in a very aggressive way. And to me, it's a quite fascinating object because it shows again the clash between something that would evoke female subjectivity with a very aggressive act, which we have seen also in another work in the show called Lectern downstairs. In the 2000s, Anu Põder changes subjects in her artistic investigation and starts reflecting on idea of senses, desire, and nourishment. Often in these years, she employs very original materials, including perishable materials such as honey or fat or other food-related ingredients like chocolate. So here I'm standing in front of a work titled Screen from 2007, which consists of a metal grid of industrial piping, which are punctuated by hundreds of Kinder eggs. And just behind me, behind this piece, you see another work from the same year called Lickers, which consists of 2 metal heads realized with fairly cheap industrial material like chicken net or fences, from which protrudes out these 2 sensual, pink, fleshy tongues.